Good morning. My name is Lieutenant Commander Andrea Gormley. My colleague, Commander Kelly Ngan, and I are with CDER's Counter-Terrorism and Emergency Coordination staff, and we'll be speaking with you today about CDER's role in public health emergency response and medical countermeasure development. So thank you for joining us today. Throughout this talk, I will define what products are medical countermeasures and describe medical countermeasure-specific development tools. I will provide an overview of FDA's tools and authorities for facilitating the availability of MCMs for emergency preparedness and response. Commander Ngan will then discuss how CDER approaches response to a potential or actual public health emergency, including for the COVID-19 pandemic. And Commander Ngan will also describe the CDER process for facilitating emergency investigational new drug or EIND applications requests after business hours. Again, Commander Ngan and I work for the Counter-Terrorism and Emergency Coordination Staff, or CTECS. We are organized under the Office of the Center Director in CDER, along with some other specialized program staffs. CTECS has physicians, pharmacists, a nurse, veterinarians, a toxicologist, and emergency response specialists, among others, to support the preparedness and response needs of CDER. To the right of the slide is a link that gives more information about CTECS and our various responsibilities if you are interested in obtaining more information. CTECS is basically divided into two sides of the house. The first is facilitating the development of medical countermeasures that are safe and effective for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats, also known as seaborne threats, and also emerging infectious diseases. The other side of CTECS coordinates CDER emergency responses that pertain to drugs and biological therapeutics that are regulated by CDER. And this is the topic that Commander Ngan will cover for you. We've talked a bit about medical countermeasures, so I want to define products that are considered medical countermeasures, which includes products that could be used during public health emergencies to prevent or treat diseases or conditions caused by chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear threats. Again, otherwise known as seaborne, and also emerging infectious disease threats, such as pandemic influenza, Zika virus, and SARS-CoV-2. FDA is responsible for reviewing the safety and effectiveness of MCMs intended to counter such threats. Some types of MCMs are further defined in the Public Health Service Act, such as security countermeasure, qualified countermeasure, and qualified pandemic or epidemic product. And these more in-depth definitions can relate to specific statutory requirements, so I mention this just for reference. CTECS supports emergency preparedness at the national level by working with several other federal government agencies, including the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, also known as ASPR, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, which is also under ASPR, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, for creating things such as home prep instructions for making suspensions from tablets, also the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Defense to support the DoD's product development needs to support the needs of the warfighter, and also state departments of health. CTECS serves on many cross-agency working groups to maintain a broad view of preparedness goals and challenges so that CDER can optimize support of national preparedness goals. This diagram shows how CTECS fits into the medical countermeasure development process. CTECS works as a consultative office. We do not have regulatory authority like CDER's Office of New Drugs Review Divisions. CTECS can help to assist with early discussions to MCM developers, particularly those without much regulatory experience, to help them get started with FDA requirements and engage the developers with the appropriate review division. We also consult with CDER's review divisions on MCM-specific policy and regulations. It is important to note that all submissions go into CDER's Office of New Drugs, and all regulatory decisions on medical countermeasures come out of the Office of New Drugs. CTECS only provides a consultative service. Most non-medical countermeasure products follow the traditional drug development pathway, meaning the supporting data comes from animal toxicology, manufacturing quality data, and human safety and efficacy studies. However, medical countermeasure products are unique. Sometimes it is not ethical or feasible to conduct human efficacy studies when exposure to the CBURN agent could be lethal. An alternative pathway, the animal rule, was implemented for such circumstances. Under the animal rule, efficacy is established based on adequate and well-controlled studies of animal models of the human disease or condition. The authority for the animal rule extends to drugs regulated by CDER and also biologics regulated by CDER and CBER, and can be found in the CFR at the citations listed on the slide. There is also a guidance for product developers seeking to utilize the animal rule pathway, and that guidance document can be found at the link on the slide. As noted on the previous slide, under the animal rule, efficacy is established based on adequate and well-controlled studies in animals when the results of those animal studies establish that the drug product or the biological product is reasonably likely to produce clinical benefit in humans. However, it is an important distinction to note that under the animal rule, safety continues to be evaluated under the pre-existing requirements for drugs and biological products, meaning safety data can be collected in humans. There are 4 requirements under the animal rule, and all 4 must be met for FDA to rely on the data. The first is that there is a reasonably well understood pathophysiological mechanism of the toxicity of the substance and its prevention or substantial reduction by the product. Second, the effect is demonstrated in more than one animal species expected to react with a response predictive for humans, unless there is a well-characterized animal model for predicting the human response, and then a single animal species is sufficient. The third is the animal study endpoint is clearly related to the desired benefit in humans, and this is generally the enhancement of survival or prevention of major morbidity. And fourth, the data or information on the pharmacokinetics or the pharmacodynamics of the product allow for the selection of an effective dose in humans. And basically, this means there must be sufficient PK and PD data to bridge the effective dose that was seen in animals to what an effective dose in the humans would be. If all of these criteria are met, it is reasonable to expect that the effectiveness of the drug in animals is a reliable indicator of its effectiveness in humans. FDA does maintain a website of animal rule approvals at the link provided here on the slide. Some recent examples are tecovirimat, or TPOXX, which was approved in 2018, with an indication for the treatment of human smallpox disease in adults and pediatric patients weighing at least 13 kilograms. Another example is pegfilgrastim, or Neulasta, which was approved in 2015 under the animal rule, with an indication to increase survival in patients acutely exposed to myelosuppressive doses of radiation, also known as hematopoietic subsyndrome of acute radiation syndrome. It is very important to note that products approved under the animal rule are critical for the protection of public health and national security. CTECS also leads for CDER a program called the Animal Model Qualification Program, or AMQP, which is a product-independent, resource-conserving approach to advanced development of animal models for use in animal rule applications. Submitting an animal model for qualification is voluntary, and approval of a drug or biological product under the animal rule does not require use of a qualified model. However, the use of a qualified model will expedite product development and FDA's review of the regulatory applications, because qualification ensures the model adequately models key elements of the human disease or condition. If you are interested in more information on the Animal Model Qualification Program, you can visit the website that is noted on the slide. The primary goal for any medical countermeasure is to obtain full FDA approval before stockpiling and use during an emergency response. However, that is not always possible. For example, there might not be any approved products for the threat or condition. Also, an approved product might need to be used in unapproved ways, for example, in a new age group or for a new threat or condition, or without an individual prescription. Another scenario is that there might be supply shortages of an approved product, or the clinical trial environment might not be practical. So one way to gain access to such investigational products is through expanded access mechanisms. And later in the presentation, Commander Ngan will cover CTECS's role in facilitating access to investigational products through expanded access mechanisms after hours. FDA also has emergency use mechanisms for certain circumstances to make such investigational products available to respond to public health emergencies. That we will cover in the next few slides, including emergency use authorization, which has played a big role in the COVID-19 response. Just to provide some background on the Emergency Use Authorization Authority, or EUA Authority as it is more commonly known, this authority was established by the Project BioShield Act of 2004, and the EUA Authority was delegated to the Commissioner of the FDA. The EUA Authority has been subsequently amended to add additional authorities and flexibilities, as you can see on the slide, including extending this to animal drugs and also adding additional flexibilities for the DoD. The initial concept for the EUA Authority was part of the post-9/11 federal government focus on medical countermeasure stockpiling and preparedness for counterterrorism. This authority was intended to provide physicians and public health officials with important new tools for public health and medical care under emergency conditions, as there was a recognition there will always be promising new drugs, biological products, and devices in the pipeline, as well as promising investigational uses of already approved products. To define what an EUA is, it is a legal mechanism FDA can use to facilitate access to critical medical products during certain defined emergency events. With an EUA, FDA can authorize for use in emergencies involving a seaborne agent and, for DoD, agents that cause imminently life-threatening and specific risk to U.S. military forces, the use of unapproved MCMs, this is products that have never been approved before, or the unapproved use of approved MCMs. So, for example, this might be for a new indication, such as amoxicillin for anthrax, as amoxicillin is an approved product, but does not currently have an approved anthrax indication. FDA does maintain an EUA website at the link you see on the slide here. This webpage will include all of FDA's active EUAs, so this is not just limited to those under CDER, but would be FDA-wide. There is also an EUA guidance available at the link on the slide to assist product developers who are interested in submitting a request for an EUA. This slide provides a high-level summary of the EUA issuance process, signifying all of the pieces that must be in place for an EUA to be authorized. Before FDA can use the EUA authority, there must be a determination of emergency made by the Secretary of the Department of Defense, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, or the Secretary of Health and Human Services, or the Department of Homeland Security Secretary's identification of a material threat. Based on this determination, the HHS Secretary then makes a declaration that circumstances exist justifying the use of the EUA authority. After the determination and declaration are in place, the relevant FDA center and division reviews the EUA request submission and determines whether the EUA criteria, which we will cover in a few slides, are met. If there is a recommendation to authorize, the EUA package moves to the FDA Commissioner to make a final decision. The EUA authority was most heavily relied upon to date by the FDA during the COVID-19 pandemic response. The following provides the COVID-19 events that supported using the EUA authority for the public health emergency response. On February 4th, 2020, HHS issued an EUA determination that there is a public health emergency that has a significant potential to affect national security or the health and security of United States citizens living abroad, and that this involves the virus that causes COVID-19. Based on that determination, on March 27, 2020, HHS issued an EUA declaration for drugs and biological products justifying the authorization of emergency use during the COVID-19 pandemic. With the determination and declaration in place, this positioned FDA to be able to issue COVID-19 EUAs. As of the date of this talk, CDER has issued 9 EUAs for products to treat COVID-19 and serious conditions caused by COVID-19. A few examples include the product remdesivir, monoclonal antibodies, and also supportive care products, such as for intubation and dialysis. One of the treatments, remdesivir, that was initially authorized for use under EUA, has moved to achieve full FDA approval for use in COVID-19. Across FDA, other COVID-19 EUA examples include, of course, vaccines, convalescent plasma, testing devices, personal protective equipment, decontamination systems, ventilators, and infusion pumps, among many others. The EUA statutory criteria for issuance under Section 564 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act are that there must be a serious or life-threatening illness or condition caused by the agent referred to in the HHS Secretary's EUA declaration, that based on the totality of scientific evidence available to FDA, there is a reasonable belief that the product may be effective in preventing, diagnosing, or treating serious or life-threatening diseases or condition caused by the agent, and that the known and potential benefits outweigh the known and potential risks. It's important to note that this provides for a different standard of evidence than for product approvals, and also that EUAs are reviewed very much on a case-by-case basis. The recommended safety and effectiveness data requirement can vary depending on the nature of the emergency itself and also the product candidate. The fourth criterion is that there must be no adequate, approved, and available alternative to the product. And again, this reflects the preference for a product that has received full FDA approval. If such an approved product is available, then it should be used. Only when no such approved product is available is an EUA considered. Another component of EUAs are the conditions of authorization, which are safeguards specific to each EUA intended to protect the public health. And some conditions of authorization are required and some are discretionary. The conditions of authorization are found within the EUA's letter of authorization. And this letter of authorization, or LOA, is available on the FDA's EUA website from the previous slide. Conditions of authorization may include things such as adverse event reporting requirements, manufacturing and distribution requirements, or, for example, cold chain requirements, or labeling requirements, among other things deemed relevant for safe and effective use of the product under the terms of the emergency use authorization. EUA Fact Sheets are another component of the EUA package. There are 2 fact sheets with each EUA. The first is the fact sheet for healthcare providers, and the second is the fact sheet for patients or parents' caregivers. The fact sheet for healthcare providers gives information comparable to an FDA-approved package insert or instructions for use. And this serves as the labeling resource during the emergency response for an unapproved product, as this will be the only available product information. For an approved product authorized for unapproved use, the fact sheet can refer to the package insert. And during the COVID response, we even linked some of the fact sheets back to the full approved package insert so that the most robust product information could be provided to healthcare providers if needed for reference. Within the fact sheet for patients or parents caregivers, there is information about how to take the product, about the EUA itself, and also information such as side effects, storage conditions, and contraindications. When preparing these fact sheets, we do try to be mindful of length for emergency response logistics. And what this means is it can be cumbersome if a fact sheet is 65 pages to print and make available these fact sheets for multiple patients at points of dispensing. The COVID-19 response itself did not pose a power outage or printing issue scenario, so this was not really a consideration during the COVID-19 response. And with this response, some of the fact sheets were even made available online for ease of patient use and logistics of printing these things out. Again, these fact sheets can be found on FDA's EUA website as part of the full EUA package. As noted before, EUAs are reviewed very much on a case-by-case basis, and FDA review timelines and action on an EUA request can depend on many factors, such as the product profile, what product data are available to support FDA's risk-benefit analysis. Also, the existence, if any, of pending applications, for example, an EIND or a pre-EUA. And this supports what does the FDA already know about this particular product. Also, the nature of the emergency. How imminent is the threat? Other relevant factors can also be contributors, such as product data in related disease states, and also other safety information. So although the time required for FDA to review and take action on an EUA request will vary based on these circumstances and others, an EUA request could be acted upon by FDA within a matter of hours or days, if appropriate, for the particular public health emergency response. FDA has other emergency access authorities for approved MCMs, just to briefly touch on these for awareness, for products that may be needed to achieve critical public health goals, but could violate provisions of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. For example, dispensing a drug product beyond its labeled expiration date, or giving recipients a simplified fact sheet about the product that are not part of its FDA-approved labeling. So some of these authorities are located under Section 564A of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. For example, emergency dispensing orders, which allows dispensing without an individual prescription if permitted by state law or in accordance with an order issued by the FDA. Also, emergency use instructions, which allows CDC to facilitate information sharing for MCMs in certain circumstances. Expiry dating extensions, which can extend the useful shelf life of eligible medical countermeasures, and also waivers of certain CGMP and REMS requirements to facilitate the availability of such MCMs. So all of these emergency use authorities are critical to optimizing FDA's ability to quickly and effectively respond to public health emergencies. So thank you for your time today, and now I will turn it over to Commander Ngan, who will speak about CTECS's role in managing CDER's emergency response procedures.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Commander Gormley. My job today is to walk everyone through how CDER manages emergency public health issues. So the first thing that you may ask is, what does an emergency actually mean to CDER? Basically, what we consider an emergency is any occurrence, either natural or man-made, that requires a rapid response to protect public health. And so we have various situations that will meet this definition. Obviously, extreme weather will, natural disasters, hurricanes, and forest fires in recent experiences will be the ones that we'll look at. Terrorist attacks or threats, hazardous material spills, nuclear accidents, and obviously emerging infectious disease outbreaks. We also will consider as an emergency any adverse event that is either thought to be related to or actually known to involve a CDER-regulated product. And a good example of this you can see in the picture on the lower right-hand side of the slide. That is actually fungus that was grown from the spinal fluid of a patient that ended up receiving an injection of a preservative-free methylprednisolone acetate that was manufactured by the New England Compounding Center back in 2012. You may remember this is one of a large public health incident, a very high-profile one that the FDA and CDC collaborated to determine the source of these patients' fungal infection. I mean, this was over 700 patients in 20 states. And when we inspected this particular firm, we found unsanitary conditions and poor quality control measures. And all of that was really a result of established emergency response procedures in CDER. So we have continued using those and adapting them over the years so that we can stay on the front of our response efforts. The last bullet on this slide, as you see, we consider an emergency, certainly, patients' access to investigational new drugs when the situations warrant emergency access. Emergency investigational new drug requests, also known as compassionate use requests, are all covered under the Expanded Access Program regulations, as are emergency procedures for situations in which the requesting physician does not have the available time due to the condition of the patient to submit the IND in accordance with the normal timeframes listed in the CFR regulations. So in this case, we do have emergency coordinators in CDER who are available during the day and after hours and on weekends, who can take calls to promptly facilitate these emergency investigational new drug application requests. Remember that a single patient IND, even in an emergency, is specific to an individual patient, provider, drug, and disease state, and is meant to treat a serious or immediately life-threatening disease or condition in which there is no comparable or satisfactory alternative treatment option available. This slide denotes the after-hours emergency IND request process that happens for CDER emergency coordinators who triage these calls. So one thing about this diagram is that it appears sequential in stepwise fashion. However, a lot of these steps can actually be happening concurrently. One important part to note also is that drug manufacturers are ultimately the decision makers on whether their drug can be provided to a patient for the particular use that is being requested. So the process will always ultimately hinge on that decision by the drug manufacturer. So once the drug manufacturer has indicated that they are willing to provide to the drug if the FDA authorizes the request, the attending physician, who is usually the person who is denoted as the requester in this slide, will contact the FDA. Someone on call will collect that information and triage the request, make sure it's in the right center and has the right clinical information for our evaluation. We will consult with the Office of New Drug Review Division to further evaluate the request. And then at some point, the FDA authorizing official will deny or authorize that request and then convey the decision back to the requester, who then can work with the manufacturer to get that drug shipped to them expeditiously for treatment of their patient. Now, this process, we aim for this all to happen within hours of the original request. Barring any specific follow-up challenges that we sometimes have with very busy clinicians. So this is, the process that we followed for many, many years. We did have a little bit of disruption of this process in our COVID pandemic situation, in that we had so many calls for COVID-related therapeutics that we had to basically bolster our resources and our staff to handle all of them. So one adaptation we had during the pandemic was really adding on many more volunteers to man our call center so that we could promptly address all incoming requests and continue to maintain our standard of service to physicians who are requesting these compassionate use requests and getting them authorized or denied, and if that was the case, within a few hours. So we managed to meet that goal, and that was a significant success of our COVID response. On this slide is listed EIND tools and resources, both from the FDA and our collaborative partner, the Reagan-Udall Foundation. Both of these organizations have worked very closely to provide tools for stakeholders such as patients, attending physicians, and industry on how to, gain access to investigational new drugs for their patients when needed and in a prompt fashion. So I encourage you to look at these. So now we're going to move on to broader emergency response on behalf of CDER. How does FDA operate differently during public health emergencies? Well, we follow our established emergency operations plans, which are publicly available on the web. In these operations plans, we have certain contingencies for when we will stand up a centralized coordinating body to ensure that all of the agency is moving together towards resolving a particular public health concern. And that could be something as small as an isolated product quality issue. It could be for a natural disaster, or it could be for a pandemic such as we are in now. We activate things called the incident management groups, which can be utilized as a resource for coordination of a response at both the agency level and at center levels, such as the Center for Drugs or Center for Devices. And we employ various tactics and strategies to form our response, and those are consistent amongst all of the centers. So this is the example framework for an incident management group in CDER. What we do is my office, CTECS, will coordinate the response, and we're the center of this circle bubble, and we'll pull together experts from main areas in CDER and main offices, such as compliance. We always have communication staff, product quality, drug shortage team, and regulatory policy. So really what we might call a task force for addressing a public health issue may have subject matter experts specific to the resolution and investigation of that particular issue. So some of these surrounding bubbles on the task force may change depending on the nature of the incident that we're responding to. Our incident management group will work with the FDA level incident management group, which will also work with external U.S. government stakeholders, or say state boards of pharmacy, or even international agencies as well, to make sure that we're all working in the same direction towards a response. On this slide lists the emergency response activities that are typical of our public health response under the CDER Incident Management Plan. So in any kind of public health emergency, our main goal in CDER is to assemble the right people to make decisions on how to investigate and respond to an incident, to really work with our U.S. government partners to collect information and share data and make decisions in a unified fashion. We're really trying to get at the facts, perform inspections, do testing, decide what the facts let us know about a particular product and whether it's safe or not, or situations that we might improve through regulatory strategies, and really develop a data-driven strategic response on how to either remove an offending agent or address a pandemic when there is a threat to public health. The first CDER emergency scenario I'll return to is the natural disaster. Number one objective in any natural disaster is to confirm that CDER staff is safe in that particular area, of the hurricane path, for example. Our next objective is also to ensure potentially contaminated CDER regulated products are not introduced into commerce. So we know that as the storm will maybe move through its path, and this is using the hurricane as an example, we will see potentially flooded material, firms that no longer have power, so therefore don't have access to maybe clean water or humidity control in a warehouse, or even equipment that has been damaged during the storm. So we have ways to target outreach to firms after the threat has passed from the natural disaster, and really to assess whether their products are actually safe to be used by the public. If it is not, we work very closely with firms to also at the same time prevent and mitigate any product shortages, especially as concerned to high priority drugs such as medically necessary drugs or drugs that require a high amount of confidence and sterility, for example. So those are all kind of areas we work on in a natural disaster. If we do have concerns about shortages, we would definitely communicate with external and internal partners in terms of how to manage that. So as mentioned, CDER takes very seriously any indication that there's an issue with our products, such as a product quality issue. So you can review the definition of an adulterated drug at 21 U.S.C. 351. Anytime that we think that there might be a product quality issue, a potential contamination of the product, or the product is not being manufactured according to current good manufacturing practices, we will probably form a task force in CDER to investigate this. Our key response objectives here are to ensure the safety, quality, and security of human drugs, and then to communicate the response findings to stakeholders. One good example of how we did this in collaboration with CDC was back in 2016. So at that time, CDC was investigating cases of Burkholderia cepacia infections in 8 states with over 60 cases, both kids and adults. And at the beginning of this particular investigation, we were looking at many different products that could have been a potential source of the outbreak. However, it was eventually narrowed down to this DocuState liquid, and it was determined that the DocuState liquid, upon testing, did have the Burkholderia cepacia organism. Once the FDA did an inspection of the firm that manufactured it in Florida, we were able to determine that their water system and products at that firm also had grown out Burkholderia cepacia, and we were able to genomically match clinical isolates with actual product. So we knew that this was really the source of the infections in the patients. So with that, we were able to work with the firm and voluntarily recall all of the lots of this particular product, over 10 lots, from the market. And this was a 6-month investigation that ultimately, pulled a contaminated product from the market to protect public health. A more recent product issue concern is involving hand sanitizer and methanol contamination of that hand sanitizer. So one thing that's important to remember about hand sanitizer is, unlike the previous example of DocuState liquid, which was actually, that's an approved drug product, hand sanitizer is regulated by the FDA under the OTC monograph of consumer antiseptic rub. So while it is a drug, it is not an approved drug because OTC monograph drugs are not pre-approved by the FDA. So companies do not submit applications to us to pre-approve before they're on the market. As long as the company complies with the conditions of the OTC monograph for that particular category, then they can be on the market without pre-approval by the FDA. One kind of side note to this is that when you're thinking about hard surface cleaners, such as maybe your Lysol spray that is supposed to sanitize your countertop, that would be actually under the purview of EPA. So they can approve surface cleaner products with claims of killing SARS-CoV, but that is only for hard surfaces, not for human skin. Human skin products are regulated by the FDA, but we do not approve them in advance because, again, they are under the OTC monograph. The only allowed ingredients under the OTC monograph for consumer antiseptic rubs are benzalkonium chloride, ethanol, and isopropyl alcohol. So back in June of 2020, FDA became aware of reports of patients who were having methanol poisoning associated with hand sanitizer ingestion. And this included young children. Now, obviously, we know that people aren't supposed to ingest hand sanitizer, but we know that there can be accidental ingestion by children, and also that some adults will intentionally ingest hand sanitizer as an ethanol alternative. So in any respect, if this hand sanitizer with the methanol is ingested, patients can have methanol poisoning. And this can be life-threatening, including blindness and other adverse events such as death. So what did we do about this particular problem? So once we became aware of the hand sanitizer methanol poisonings and the cases associated with that, we issued a public warning immediately the same month that we became aware of last year. Within the next month, in July, we had already placed certain hand sanitizers on import alert. And this was to ensure that certain hand sanitizer firms, most of them from Mexico at the time, they were not allowed to bring in violative products into the U.S. So the import alert helped prevent those products from entry into the U.S. because they would be automatically detained at the border. We also, on the same date, July 27th, we had posted a list of hand sanitizers that consumers should not use. So this would allow people to actually, look in their cabinets and compare it to firms making hand sanitizer that we had already found violative in our own testing. We also began warning people later in the month about subpotent hand sanitizer because we were beginning to find different products that say didn't even have the required amount of ethanol or isopropyl alcohol in it to be effective. Once you move into August, we found other impurities that we publicized. We also provided impurity testing method for people to be able to test their own products for impurities. And on August 27th of 2020, we had to issue a specific warning for hand sanitizer packaged in food and drink containers. So if you can see the picture Here, this looks very much like a food pouch that a child would ingest, and in fact, this picture was taken from the product used by a grandmother in Canada. She was babysitting her grandson and accidentally gave him this, thinking it was a food pouch. So it's easy to see how this could be mistaken as food, and children could unexpectedly be exposed to the alcohols in the hand sanitizer when they ingest it. We've also had cases of hand sanitizer being packaged in things that look like water bottles or vodka containers. So we've had to ask the companies and work with them to voluntarily recall these products because they could be accidentally ingested by people. So we worked on that. In January of 2021, we actually provided guidance that outlined the agency's policy for drug manufacturers and compounders to test alcohol or isopropyl alcohol for methadone contamination prior to using it to produce drugs, including hand sanitizer, because we do know that people or drug manufacturers do use alcohols in drug manufacturing besides just hand sanitizer. In January 26th of 2021, we expanded our import alert to all firms from Mexico that make alcohol-based hand sanitizer in order to ensure that we are capturing any potential or violative product before it entered the U.S. So we're going to move to kind of the broader COVID response activities for the agency. Specifically, also in CDER had a large role in all of these particular efforts. You can see that the first two are global supply chain and fraudulent products. I'm going to be touching most of my time on them, and then I will briefly mention the other ones as well. But know that CDER really immediately started standing up a response on all of these areas back in the first week in February, right after the public health emergency was announced in 2020. One of the key reasons FDA focused on supply chain work during COVID is because we know that any disruption in the supply-demand balance can be a major risk factor for compromised patient safety. So we know that the supply chain is global and also delicate, so we really did not wait for companies to notify us of potential problems with their supplies. We actually reached out proactively to all manufacturers in February of 2020 as part of our forward-leaning approach to identify potential disruptions or shortages. Throughout the pandemic, we also coordinated very closely with our HHS partners, such as CDC and the Strategic National Stockpile, on supply chain issues. Other U.S. government entities also reached out to us, and we worked with them. We engaged with group purchasing organizations, as well as medication safety-related organizations, such as the Institute for Safe Medication Practices. So this slide goes over a few key areas of things that we can and cannot require related to drug shortages, but also it's important to realize that there's a lot of things FDA can do to help ameliorate any potential problems with the drug supply. One thing we can do is to work with manufacturers to see if, say, one supplier can ramp up production during a shortage, and then we can assist them with reviewing applications for, say, another manufacturing facility or a manufacturing line that it might need to be able to execute that action. We can expedite FDA inspections of a specific facility if that will help increase supply globally. We can exercise temporary regulatory discretion for new sources of medically necessary drugs. This might include, say, importing an unapproved drug in this country, but it is approved in another country. We can also work with companies to release maybe certain batches based on specific risk mitigation plans that they have for product quality for that particular batch. CDER really approaches evaluation of any potential drug shortage holistically. So again, we look across all manufacturers and the entire global supply chain when we are evaluating those and determining what regulatory strategies to implement to mitigate the risks of shortage. When we do determine that a product is in shortage, we do post that on our website as indicated at the link in the first bullet. We also can work with manufacturers when they submit stability data on their products. And what we'll do is we will, expeditiously review that data and then extend products' expiration dates if we feel the data warrant that. And that can really help with the availability of supply for certain lots of products. Again, any kind of stability data has to be provided by the manufacturer and is manufacturer driven in terms of whether they want to extend the expiry date of their particular products. This did happen as an example during COVID for Gojo, which was the maker of the Perel products. They were able to extend some of the lots of their hand sanitizer products from 3 years to 5 years from date of manufacture. Another key area that we have done a lot of work in related to drug shortages is policy work, and that is related to providing guidance to industry during the public health emergency on ways they can facilitate critical drug supplies. When we issue these guidance during the public health emergency, we've always carefully considered potential safety issues that could arise as a result of the guidance. One example of the guidance that we implemented was the temporary compounding guidance that stated that FDA does not intend to take action against outsourcing facilities for compounding a drug that is essentially a copy of an approved drug, even if it's not on the drug shortage list. So in normal times, you would have to be on the drug shortage list to be able to compound such a product. But in the public health emergency, we did expand our policy on that in order to increase supplies of critical drugs, such as the anesthesia drugs used in treatment of COVID patients. Another recent guidance that we did for 2021 back in March was issuing guidance to application holders on reporting and implementing changes to container closure system components that consisted of glass vials and stoppers. We know that those specific components are becoming hard to come by on the global market, so companies are having to kind of renegotiate different manufacturing contracts to obtain those components, and thus are going to have to change their applications. So we provided guidance on how to do that and to obtain more information from the FDA. So moving into COVID and fraudulent products, this is a really key area for us during the pandemic because we're protecting people from fraudulent claims of curing or preventing COVID. And this was really rampant during the pandemic, as you probably have noticed. And we know that fraudulent products really pose unique risks to patients. I mean, they cause adverse events, delays in onset of care, drug interactions, and can even do overdose situations because these are just not held to the standards by which FDA approves other products. Remember that any product that is claiming either on its labeling or in advertising or on the web to mitigate, prevent, treat, diagnose, or cure COVID, that is a false product, fraudulent product, unless it is actually an FDA-approved product, which you can check online. So even in the case of this honey jar that has COVID-19 on it, if there's any labeling that says that this honey actually is curing COVID, then we're going to consider you an unapproved drug product and you're in violation of the Act. So that's just something to consider with any of your products. When we did have the beginning of the pandemic, we immediately started up a multidisciplinary task force called Operation Quack Hack. And this was a team of consumer safety officers, special agents, intelligent analysts that did active surveillance of the web and online marketplaces, online pharmacies. They triaged incoming complaints. They were able to do undercover buys. We were able to test a lot of these products ourselves and ensure that they were in regulatory compliance. We worked with the Customs and Border Patrol and as well as the DOJ to perform some of these compliance and regulatory activities. And we have published many of the pictures of these products online in the Flickr photo album link that you can see. And also all of the ones, the products that we have issued warning letters for are listed on our fraudulent product webpage, which is listed there. FDA actions for fraudulent products. As I mentioned, we have a website of warning letters that list all of the ones specific to COVID. We also can do seizures and injunctions if necessary as regulatory tools for us. Since March of 2020, you can see that we've actually issued 119 warning letters related to manufacturers of products with drug claims. When we do issue a warning letter, we do give the manufacturer time to respond to that. And remember that all warning letters are made public on our website. This is a case example of when we have a company that will not respond to a warning letter. So in this case, Miracle Mineral Solution, also known as MMS, was a very concerning product to the FDA. This is because it's 28% sodium chloride in distilled water. And once you follow the instructions and add an activating acid agent, it becomes chlorine dioxide, which is a powerful bleaching agent. The FDA has received many reports of this being a causative agent of people getting sick over the years. And so in this case, a main manufacturer of this product, Genesis 2 Church of Health and Healing, was issued a warning letter on April 8th of 2020 and told that they were issued the warning letter for fraudulent claims of treating and preventing COVID. This product was even promoted for use in children. They were given 48 hours to respond. The firm that manufactured the product, they did respond to the warning letter, but said they had no intention of doing anything about their product and corrective actions. So later that month, the federal court did enter a temporary injunction against Genesis 2 Church of Health and Healing business, and then later permanent injunctions were entered. And as recently as April 2021, the family that runs that firm was indicted by the Justice Department for fraudulently marketing and selling this product as a cure for not only COVID, but also other conditions such as cancer, Alzheimer's disease, autism, multiple sclerosis, and HIV/AIDS. Tens of thousands of bottles of this product have been sold both nationwide and internationally. But it does illustrate that FDA will exercise all of our authorities in order to protect public health from dangerous products. This slide highlights a very few of the many accomplishments of CDER's COVID response that I have not already discussed in detail, along with drug development, pharmacovigilance, inspections, and public communications. I believe that other presenters are really detailing the actions in these specific areas, so I won't go into them here. But I do want to just at least highlight that public communications and really getting the information out about risk and benefit and the facts, scientific data that we have for any of our regulatory decisions is of utmost importance to CDER during an emergency response. And so we're always looking for how to communicate with the public and also work with our stakeholders on their messaging. So this is the summary of our presentation. CDER's everyday mission is to ensure the efficacy, safety, and security of human drugs. And this continued throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, it became even more important because we know that people are particularly vulnerable during such an uncertain and threatening time. We had pre-established MCM development and emergency access authorities, and they were used to great success during this public health emergency. We were able to rapidly deploy them and refine them as needed. And we will continue to use them. My office, CTECS, we will continue to remain committed to furthering development of MCMs for our next public health emergency. And also CDER, through our office and all of our participating partners, we really stand ready at all times to coordinate responses to any type of public health emergency, large or small. And we also are always available to help physicians and patients work with industry to access unapproved uses of investigational drugs. And with that, we will move to our challenge question number 1. FDA's issuance of an EUA means that the product is FDA approved. True or false? The answer is false, and that is because an EUA does not mean that the product is FDA approved. The EUA has not undergone the same review as an FDA approved product, because the EUA authority is intended to make investigational products available during certain emergency circumstances only, and it is not a regulatory endpoint. The FDA always encourages EUA sponsors to continue product development that is necessary to support submission of a marketing application for their product. Moving to challenge question number 2. Which of the following is not an example of a public health intervention employed by the FDA during the COVID-19 pandemic? Is it A, removing fraudulent products that claim to kill SARS-CoV-2 on hard surfaces from the consumer marketplace? B, placing firms manufacturing adulterated hand sanitizers on FDA import alert? C, reviewing product stability data submitted by drug manufacturers to determine if extensions of labeled expiry dates are scientifically supported? Or D, publishing temporary policy under which outsourcing facilities can compound certain critical care drugs that are not on the FDA drug shortage list? The answer is A, removing fraudulent products that claim to kill SARS-CoV-2 on countertops from the consumer marketplace. This is because, as we mentioned before, anything that is indicated to kill the virus on hard surfaces, such as countertops, is actually the purview of the EPA. The FDA does work to remove fraudulent products with unproven SARS-CoV-2 claims from the marketplace as long as it's related to drugs regulate. We don't regulate products claiming to kill the virus on hard surfaces like countertops. And that concludes our presentation, and we will now entertain questions from the audience. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrea and Kelly, for your presentations today and for taking time to answer questions. For our audience, if you have a question for either of our presenters, you can go ahead and put them into the Q&A chat pod. And with that, we'll get started with our first question, which is for Andrea. What does a sponsor need to do to get approval of a product that was authorized under an EUA? Does a separate NDA or BLA need to be submitted? In other words, how will an EUA authorized vaccines be able to get approved?
Good morning, and thank you for a great question. First, it's really important to note that an EUA is not a regulatory endpoint. EUAs are only intended to support the emergency response. It's always the preference to have a full FDA approval or licensure for a product. So yes, a separate BLA or NDA would be required to be submitted, meeting all of the traditional drug development requirements. When FDA is working with EUA sponsors, FDA continues to highly encourage these EUA sponsors to continue their product's development towards full approval or licensure, as long as the data does support that further development. But yes, a separate NDA or BLA would be needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And we have another question for you. How is the EUA authority different for military EUAs? Is it a different pathway from COVID EUAs?
Thank you again for another great question. The statutory requirements under Section 564 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act requires that the CBURN agent, and again, that's chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear agent, must be capable of causing serious or life-threatening disease or condition. For military EUAs, the EUA authority is broadened to also include agents that may cause imminently life-threatening and specific risk to U.S. military forces. And again, this broadening of the EUA authority in the military space has the intent of optimizing our support to the U.S. military forces as much as possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Andrea. And we have another question for you. Thanks to our audience for such great questions. How does FDA prioritize EUA requests?
Thank you again for another great question. So many factors can influence how FDA prioritizes EUA reviews in the event of multiple EUA requests. For example, some of these factors may include the public health need for the product, the known safety and efficacy data for the particular product, also the amount of product that is available for patient use, whether the product is already in a government stockpile, among others. And that's sort of some of the guiding principles that we use when there are multiple EUA requests in-house to prioritize which EUA review should come first. So the EUA guidance that was referenced in the slides, the link is there, contains a much more detailed discussion of these prioritization factors if you're interested. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that answer. And we have a fourth question for you. Does FDA perform re-evaluation of an existing EUA in light of new data from studies and adverse event reporting? If they do, how is such a re-evaluation performed?
So this is a really important point. So thank you for submitting this question. It's important to note that reevaluation of products that are used under an EUA is happening all the time in real time at the FDA. So adverse event reporting requirements are outlined in the EUA's letter of authorization. That outlines all of the requirements for how the product can be used under the EUA. And with these reporting requirements, FDA is constantly monitoring what's going on out in the field when these products are being used under EUA. And if at any point there's data that comes in, whether it be from studies or whether it be from these adverse event reporting trends, if data comes in that would change the risk-benefit analysis for use under the emergency use authorization, the FDA does evaluate whether the EUA should remain in effect or whether at that point with the additional data it should be revoked. So under EUA, this is ongoing constantly and in real time at the FDA. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Andrea. And now we actually have some questions for Kelly. So first question to Kelly. In requesting an EIND, I've seen some manufacturers wait for FDA approval prior to initiating the shipment of the emergency drug to the site, whereas some other companies will go ahead and ship in advance before the FDA approval was obtained. What guidance does FDA have on what's appropriate?
Good morning, everyone. This is Kelly. Thank you for the question. So in that particular situation, FDA doesn't necessarily have a recommendation on shipment of the drug, shipment of the investigational drug to the requester or the attending physician. That's really a company decision. The FDA does require that, again, that the requester follows the emergency IND regulations and the procedures in place before they actually administer the drug. So if the company wants to send it in advance, say potentially for a drug that we know is requested often, and they often authorize maybe for a particular hospital, one hospital during COVID might have had, hundreds of remdesivir requests or Regeneron COVID requests during the pandemic. And so they might be used to the drug and usually expect FDA authorization. So in that case, they may be willing and comfortable to send it in advance. However, we can't administer the drug to the patient till the emergency IND regulations and procedures are followed, and FDA has authorized the request and sent that authorization in formal writing by email to the requester.
Great, thank you, Kelly. We have another question for you. How does FDA assess that a particular drug is in short supply?
Thank you for that question. So that is a process that is handled by CDER's drug shortage staff, and we had a whole slide on that, including the website there that is available for use, and you can contact them at any time. So how we do that is just in general, I will defer to their expertise in that area. But we were, again, I think I mentioned that we
evaluate every potential drug shortage holistically. And the statutes have required that drug companies notify us of an impending shortage or an actual shortage that is in occurrence due to various situations. So that is a required notification to the FDA, to the CDER drug shortage staff, and they are able to take in all of that information that comes in, and then they will assess maybe that company's particular situation. They will follow up with questions to that company. What are your mitigation strategies to address the shortage that you either think is going to happen or is actually happening? They will be able to look at other manufacturers of that same drug and reach out to them and see if they can increase supply if they're willing to do that, or if they're even able to. They will be able to assess the particular market share of the company that's reporting a shortage and look at other potential, drugs that may be able to be used instead of the drug that is reported to be in shortage. So we really take a lot of different factors into account about whether a drug actually is in shortage and will be posted on our website, or whether we can, augment that supply from other places. And so there's not really like one particular formula that we use to assess drug supply, but we look at the entire global supply chain and also the condition the drug is being used to treat, and take that all into account.
Great, thank you so much, Kelly. We have another question for you. Would the full approval of COVID-19 vaccines allow mandating vaccine administration?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to defer that question to our Center for Biologics group. So if you are able to go to a session later in the week by the Center for Biologics, or CBER, they are the center that actually regulates all vaccines, whereas this is I work for the Center for Drugs, and we do differentiate some of those COVID products between whether they are biologic in terms of vaccines or a drug in terms of, for example, remdesivir.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Can you talk about the approval process for hand rubs that do not have ingredients listed in the OTC monograph?
Certainly. So I mentioned earlier that hand sanitizer consumer antiseptic rubs are regulated under the OTC monograph, and those the allowed ingredients are benzalkonium chloride, ethanol, and isopropyl alcohol. So outside of those authorized ingredients on the monograph, again, the OTC monograph process is that as long as a company in faith is basically using the OTC monograph, the labeling and the packaging instructions that are associated with that, the manufacturing instructions associated with that, then they are not they do not have to submit an application in advance to the FDA for FDA pre-approval before they're able to use and market their product to consumers. However, anything outside of that monograph, and in this case, currently only those 3 ingredients, if there was some other ingredient that was outside of that monograph that you wanted to use in a consumer rub, then you would have to follow the NDA or ANDA regulations and submit the required information and data to the FDA in advance for pre-approval before using it in the marketplace.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Kelly, for answering these questions. And we have a couple questions now for Andrea. So, Andrea, is there a time limit for an EUA, or when does an EUA expire? Can it be used indefinitely? And as a follow-up, when a product receives marketing approval, is that when it expires, or is it no longer in effect?
Thank you for a great question. So to answer simply, no, an EUA is not indefinite. During the presentation, we talked about all of the requirements that must be in place in order for FDA to utilize the EUA authority, such as the the declaration of the public health emergency and the determination that is made based on such a declaration. So first, if the circumstances no longer exist that supported the use of the EUA authority, then the EUA supporting declaration can be terminated. And if that is terminated, basically meaning that that particular public health emergency no longer exists, then any EUAs that were issued based on that declaration would also, in effect, be terminated. So I'm trying to, remember the second part of the question. Moderator,
Sure,
could you repeat the second part of the question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was a couple of them. When a product receives marketing approval, is that when, I guess, the EUA expires, or is it no longer in effect?
Thank you very much. So when a product does reach the full marketing approval, the answer is it depends on the terms of the EUA and also the terms of the approval or licensure. Of course, the part that has reached full approval, that would no longer be authorized under EUA. Again, our goal is always to try and use fully approved or fully licensed products as much as possible. The exception to that would be when the approval, the indication that has been approved is perhaps limited to a population that wouldn't cover the entire population that may need the product under emergency use authorization. An example of this is if a product was approved down to, say, 10 years of age, then it might the product might still require an EUA to treat patients that were, from birth to that 10 years of age that is not covered by the EUA. Again, as long as the use of the product in that population did continue to meet the statutory requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question for you. So the next one, Andrea, is what is the percentage of review that would be cut down during approval of an EUA with respect to, or as opposed to, regular FDA approval?
Thank you. And I think the intention of the question is to see how can these reviews be expedited, particularly in the face of an emergency response. And so there was one slide where we went through this, like what influences FDA's review times for an EUA. And probably the biggest take home is that the more that FDA already knows about the product when an EUA request comes in, the more expeditiously the review can move. Again, it has to be thorough enough to meet the review to know if the product does meet those statutory requirements under Section 564. But if there's already an existing application with the FDA, be it a pre-EUA or an IND, where FDA has reviewed, and I apologize, there's a lawnmower at the exact timing in the background, so if that's bleeding through, I apologize. But the more we know about the product, if there's data in a similar disease state, for example, in a pneumonia disease state, and you're looking at it for an inhalational threat agent, that can also help FDA in making a determination under the EUA if it meets the statutory criteria. So great question. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrea. We have another question for you. Is there a limit to how many drugs that can be authorized for a particular disease condition under EUA, for example, for oral usage?
So there is not a quantity number limit. One of the statutory criteria is that there be no approved available alternative. So, if something did reach that approval status, that might affect the analysis of how products coming in for an EUA, how that would be applied to the statutory criteria. there are a lot of contributing factors where if it had a different mechanism of treatment, then something was approved. If the approved product was not available in sufficient quantities to satisfy the needs during the public health emergency, there are just a lot of contributing factors that weigh in. But as far as a specific number, no, there does not exist one. Just, keeping moving towards as many therapeutic options as possible to satisfy the needs during the public health emergency response.
Great, thank you so much, Andrea. And we actually have a couple of questions that came in for Kelly. So Kelly, the next question for you is, in regard to national drug shortages, do wholesaler outages or priority drug shortages justify compounding these products?
Yes, that's a great question. And the answer is it can. Again, we look at the entire landscape of drug shortages and the market, and both kind of nationally reported shortages that meet certain thresholds, but also we paid very close attention during the pandemic to regional reported shortages as well. So we were kind of listening to both manufacturers in their side of the shortage situation. What could they supply? Where were they seeing shortfalls? Where could they not maybe get an active pharmaceutical ingredient? And we were also, during COVID, we stood up a drug shortage reporting portal that we advertised to health systems in our stakeholder groups, where they could sign up to a secure portal and report, say, with this healthcare system or in this one particular facility, we are seeing shortages of these particular drugs, these critical drugs that are used in the care of COVID. And we did use that information and part of kind of a sophisticated kind of supply landscape data processing that we did during the pandemic. We looked at all the information and we were able to determine that in certain cases that drugs that were not on the drug shortage list could be compounded when normally that is not the case, and I think I did go over that. So we posted that on our basically compounding. We had a COVID website for CDER, and it was under the compounding page. And I believe it's still there as in a list of certain drugs that you would be able to compound that were critical use drugs for hospitals. So yes, that definitely can be something that we look into and that we take into account to allow for temporary flexibilities in the drug shortage space.
Great, thank you, Kelly. And we have one last question for our session, and it will go to you, Kelly. Would MOP gear with self-neutralizing ability against chemical or biological agents also be regulated by FDA?
So that is a possibility. So obviously we have a lot of very complicated products that could be considered potentially even drugs or devices in some cases. And those come in the MCM realm all the time. So in this situation, I would recommend that you look at our product jurisdiction page. So there is a jurisdictional information page on the FDA.gov website, and it allows for submission of a request for designation document. So in this particular situation, I can't comment on this one type of product. However, just in general, a lot of these MCM products, especially for the military, are very complicated and could have unique regulatory structures, right? So it could be a device, it could be a drug, it could be both. It really just depends on the intent of the product, what it claims to do in terms of the biologic or chemical threats. So the best way to start is probably just to reach out to our Office of Combination Products, and they can help you make an official determination within the agency.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly and Andrea, for your time today and taking so many of our audience questions. I'm sure everyone was so delighted that they were able to ask them and get them answered by FDA. So with that, I will pass it to Ray to introduce our